By 1966, Janis Joplin had returned to San Francisco for the second time, ending up in the Haight Ashbury district. Chet Helms, who had covertly sent Travis Rivers to Austin, Texas, to retrieve her and bring her back, was successful in his mission. He was now booking Janis along with Big Brother and the holding company into different venues around San Francisco. Their first gig was at the Open Theater in Berkeley in 1966. One particular night at the Matrix, on the edge of the Marina District, she happened to meet Peggy Caserta. Raw and intense, Janis would belt out tunes that night, and her friendship would later blossom into something more with Caserta. James Gurley, who was already participating in jam sessions in the basement of 1090 Page Street, was a transplanted Detroit native who attended the seminary as a young man, hoping to become a priest before he met his wife Nancy. Being drawn to the beatnik movement on the West Coast, James would frequent a Detroit-based beatnik coffee house, the Cup of Socrates, where he met Nancy, a Wayne State University college student who was also a waitress. Sam Andrew was an Army brat who lived in several countries and states in his adolescence. He began learning music at a young age and then formed his own band as a teenager in Okinawa. Shortly after high school, his father was transferred to an air base in Northern California. Sam found his way to the University of San Francisco and soon the Haight. After hearing serious tunes emanating from the basement at 1090 Page, Sam met Peter Albin in late 1965. Peter Albin was born in San Francisco and began playing a guitar at a young age. He would later go on to form a bluegrass band with his brother Rodney while attending San Mateo College in 1964. Peter's uncle owned the large Victorian mansion at 1090 Page that became a hub for music activity in the 1960s while his brother managed it. Dave Getz had decided in high school he would be a jazz musician. He replaced Big Brother's first drummer in 1965. Dave had come to San Francisco to attend the Art Institute for painting courses. It is in this period he formed his first band. Dave happened to meet Peter Albin in a cafe below his art studio, where a comment on Peter's long hair started a lifelong friendship. Janis and Big Brother played many venues in San Francisco, in addition to out-of-town gigs that year, hoping to get that big break that would propel them into stardom. They also continued their practice in the basement of the Albin House on Page Street. With the maturing of Janis's voice and style, Big Brother began to assemble a small following of dedicated fans that would follow them throughout San Francisco. They would not be the only ones taking notice of Janis and Big Brother. In August, Janis was approached by Paul Rothchild of Elektra Records for a record deal. The problem was, Rothchild wanted Janis only, without Big Brother. Janis had decided to put off the decision until they returned from what turned out to be a disastrous club stint in Chicago. Chicago left Janis and Big Brother stranded, and as a result of this, she decided to stay with the band and take the second record contract offer with Mainstream Records. This was probably more likely due to being flat broke in Chicago with no way home, rather than a huge sense of loyalty. In September, while in Chicago, the band was signed to the record deal and began recording with Mainstream Records, recording songs for their first album, Big Brother and the Holding Company. Even though they were the first rock band to sign with a jazz-only label, Big Brother showed much promise. Almost from the beginning, the band was at odds with mainstream producers. In those days, bands were very much into the art that was created from a music venture versus the profit aspect, which was the label's approach. As a result, the band was steered more toward mainstream radio production rather than the wildly exotic psychedelic rock sounds of the late 1960s, which was their original sound. There were already fractures in the band due to Janis's increasing exposure and growing popularity. Under the mainstream contract, James Gurley was to sing lead on a number of songs, relegating Janis's importance to the band as a backup singer rather than a lead. These skewed ideals may have been misogyny or just plain inability to recognize the talent and the strongest parts of the band. Either way, this did not sit well with Janis, and of the 4 Chicago recording singles released before the album itself, all had mediocre success at best. Janis very much needed the recognition that came with singing and being on stage, perhaps as much or more than she needed the money. By this time, Janis had loved and lost at least twice. The first time with Jay Whittaker, who was purported to be Janis's first female lover. The second time was a breakup with Country Joe McDonald on the main floor of the commune he lived in, above 1472 Haight Street. Janis also had a short affair with James Gurley. During this period, James and Nancy had a young son and a German Shepherd puppy mix, and were living in an apartment on Clayton Street. Nancy had marched into Janis's Lion Street apartment and had taken James home after 2 weeks. Later that year, Janis began a relationship of sorts with Peggy Caserta in New York while staying at the Chelsea Hotel. By 1967, Janis and Big Brother had increased their popularity and income considerably, and even with a mainstream record deal, they still had not reached the desired popularity and fame they had hoped to achieve. At this time, nearly all of Big Brother, as well as Janis, had issues with alcohol and drugs, most notably heroin and speed. Janis's speed habit was acquired early on after her first move to San Francisco, and seemed to have reared its head again after her dry stint in Port Arthur. Alcohol being the less benign of these, during the year Janis moved to Southern Comfort. At some point during this time, Janis was able to cajole a $2,000 payment out of Southern Comfort due to all the pictures that show her with their ever-present brand in bottle form. It was a small token for all of the free advertising from them to her. Peggy Caserta had stated a few times how she remembered seeing Janis, James Gurley, and Sam Andrew laughing and stumbling up Haight Street, passing a bottle between them on numerous occasions from her storefront window on Haight Street near Ashbury. By late 1966, the band moved to Lagunitas in the North Bay for a few months before returning to the Haight in early 1967. They would work on music in a shared commune setting as Janis would try to get clean. Neither venture worked well. Upon Janis's return, she moved into the second-floor flat in 635 Ashbury Street. By the time they returned, the Haight was beginning to see new occupants in some numbers. LSD had just been classified a level 1 felony drug, carrying prison time. After the Human Be-In in Golden Gate Park in early 1967, the word got out across the nation that San Francisco was a place where alternative styles were accepted. This was widely due to news coverage across the nation about the burgeoning hippie counterculture movement. Around the same time, Janis moved from Ashbury Street to an apartment at 123 Cole Street, which is in the north of the Panhandle area, a short walk to Haight Ashbury. In June of 1967, Janis and Big Brother would get the break they were waiting for after playing the Monterey Pop Festival. They became nationally and internationally known. Janis would later describe the experience as one of the high points in her life. It also provided vindication in Janis's belief in herself as the talent that propelled Big Brother into stardom. This was backed by the press's recognition of Janis's talent after the Monterey Pop Festival. This recognition foreshadowed the ending of the band perhaps more than any other moment. Clive Davis had also been paying attention to Janis and Big Brother during the Monterey Pop Festival. Columbia Records had already lost out on signing most major bands of the time for one reason or another, and he was not about to let Janis and Big Brother get away, especially Janis. The situation became more difficult when it came to getting them released from their mainstream contract. After hiring famed manager Albert Grossman, the band began to make headway with Columbia regarding a new contract. In the end, Mainstream released Janis and Big Brother from their contract for a hefty sum, which cost the band future royalties and left them in debt. It turns out that Mainstream's contract signing was the biggest mistake of Big Brother's short career with Janis. Albert, as it turns out, was what the band needed at the time. After signing with Albert and then Columbia, Janis and Big Brother would now spend their time touring as part of Columbia's fancy roster instead of B-grade rejects, hitchhiking from town to town dragging their equipment. By this time, Janis had moved into the second-floor apartment on 122 Lion Street, and the newly divorced Linda Gravenites moved in with her to help sort out her life by doing the easy things. With her newfound success, Janis had moved into more relationships, some not so serious, while others were. Janis began dating Ron Pigpen McKernan and would often be seen at the Grateful Dead house on Ashbury Street. This relationship had also ended quickly, as had most of Janis's relationships around this time. In early 1968, Janis left 122 Lion Street due to the decline in the area and moved to her first purchase home in Larkspur in the North Bay. This would become a recurring pattern for most of the original hippie set from the 1960s. Janis Joplin and Big Brother released 2 albums together before Janis left the band for good, taking guitarist Sam Andrew with her in the winter of 1968. Their first album, Big Brother and the Holding Company, met with mediocre success. The second album, Cheap Thrills, was arguably Janis's most successful record with such hits as Summertime, Ball and Chain, and Piece of My Heart, and would propel Janis to stratospheric heights. Janis would go on to release 2 more albums with the Cosmic Blues Band and Full Tilt Boogie. I Got Them Old Cosmic Blues Again, Mama in late 1969, and the posthumous album Pearl in 1971. In October of 1970, Janis Joplin would leave our world due to an overdose at the Landmark Hotel in Los Angeles at just 27 years old. Big Brother would go on as individual studio musicians and playing together briefly again in 1987. Nancy Gurley, the wife of James Gurley, would sadly die of a heroin overdose while pregnant with their second child in 1969, while camping at the Russian River with their young son Hongo Gurley. Janis would dedicate her first solo album with Cosmic Blues to Nancy, as well as provide a legal fund for James, who was being charged with her death. James ended up with 2 years probation over the incident. He eventually moved on to marry again, having 1 more child. Rest in peace, Janis Joplin, Nancy Gurley, Linda Gravenites, Sam Andrew, and James Gurley, who are no longer with us. As of the filming of this video, Dave Getz and Peter Albin are now in their 80s and still playing music.